Welcome to Transformative Principal. I'm your host, Jethro Jones, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Hey, guess what? I've got a book coming out. How exciting is that? It's called School X, and it's all about helping you as a principal be a designer of your school and not just a manager. So I hope you'll check it out. You can download the free chapter at schoolx.me. So just go to schoolx.me to download the first free chapter. And once you get it, hit reply to the email and tell me what you think. Looking forward to sharing that with you. That's schoolx.me. This episode is brought to you by John Cat Educational, a professional development publisher serving as the global leader in combining both research and practice in all materials. Find timely PD publications to support yourself and your faculty by visiting them online at us.johncatbookshop.com. Great instruction gets students engaged. TeachFX equips teachers with the instructional strategies and job-embedded feedback they need to get students engaged in virtual or in-person classes. Learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer at teachfx.com/transformativeprincipal. I am excited to be a media partner for the Conrad Challenge. The Conrad Challenge is this amazing educational experience that allows students to create real-world applications to solve problems that we are facing today. It's amazing. Check out more at conradchallenge.org. That's conradchallenge.org. Welcome to Transformative Principal. This is episode 362, and I am very excited to have Kat Howard on the program today. She is the AP at the Dustin School and is also the founder of LitDrive, which is an amazing community that provides professional development for English teachers. So, Kat, welcome to Transformative Principal. I am excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you because today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things, I'm sure. But I want to first get your brief story about how you came to be in education, to be a principal, and what brought you to that point.
So I came to teaching quite late. I was working in the financial sector for a leading high street bank in the UK, and I was responsible for recruitment and retention within the bank. And I felt that kind of real lack of reward. I think when you talk to a great deal of people that have career changes within the profession, and they say a very similar thing, that it's that kind of, I've worked for money, but I haven't necessarily worked for purpose, and I think that was really lacking. So I went back to university, and then retrained as a teacher, and when I thought about what I wanted to teach and how I kind of got there, I volunteered a lot, and English is the only thing that I've really ever fallen in love with at school. So I decided that English was definitely my bag, and went back to train. So it was really that kind of that lack of reward, I think, in getting up and feeling fired up about coming into work every day. So I worked as an English teacher in various schools around, I'm kind of Midlands area of the UK, so Leicestershire and Northamptonshire. And then I was a lead practitioner, is what we call. So it's like a lead teacher for a period of time. I looked after what we call our high retainers. So ran things like lecture program within the school that I was in. So we would invite kind of external people in from local higher education authorities to come and speak to our kids, and ran that across school for a while, as well as other couple of programs, and then picked up my role at the Dustin School where I'm at now, which is a school that's, we're still on this amazing journey that we've kind of, the head's only been there for, this will be his third year. So it's a really exciting time. And so now I oversee quality of curriculum. We're all about kind of a real curriculum as a progression model, and that idea of knowledge-driven, knowledge-rich curriculum. And I also oversee staff development to kind of coincide with that, to make sure that that our teachers are experts within the classroom. So that's kind of how I've ended up where I've ended up.
Yeah, fascinating story. I love hearing about people who came into education from something else, because many of us came into education first because we knew that's what we wanted to do. But then others came in because they tried something else and didn't find the reward. And so it's always an interesting story. So one of the things that I know that you're great at, especially at this time of coronavirus crisis that we're in, that is making sure that teachers are feeling supported and taking care of themselves. And so I want to dive into that topic. And let's start by talking about things that you do to encourage teachers to take care of themselves, because that is something that everybody's working harder than they ever have before. Everybody's doing more than they ever have before. We're teaching kids in ways that we've never been trained how to teach them. And I have a little different take on that, which we can probably get into. But let's talk about that first. How do you, when the pressure is high and there's so much to do, how do you help teachers take care of themselves?
Yeah, I think that's a really it's almost a dual narrative. And when I Stop Talking About Wellbeing last year, the book about kind of approaching workload in such a way, you almost have to have two layers to that advice. It's setting the caveat of, we have a responsibility to ourselves. We have individual responsibility to making sure that we take care of ourselves, and that is paramount. A great deal of people will get caught up in sitting up until 2:00 in the morning, scavenging around for resources, when actually the best thing they could do for themselves is get 8 hours sleep. Sleep is everything. Sleep is all. Lack of sleep will kill you. So that is so paramount. But also making sure that the support is there from leadership, that those people have the capacity to be able to ask for support, and it not being seen as weakness, I think is really important. Making sure that that there are outlets for people to talk to, for teachers to talk to, and that's both on a formal and informal level. So that we're building really strong relationships between line managers and the staff that they line manage, but also on a more formal level, so that if we're looking at any changes, and things are changing so rapidly within schools from day to day at the moment, as we're trying to work around the practical logistics of coronavirus, making sure that staff are kept informed, and making sure that there's an opportunity for staff to air their views and share their experience on the ground level of, once you're trying to implement a particular rule or process, does it work, and being really receptive to those staff if it doesn't work, and how we can make it to work. And so it's kind of, when we're thinking about well-being and workload, it's making sure that everybody has the opportunity to have their voice heard. I think that's incredibly important when you're building something like a school community, for sure.
Well, I think that piece about everybody being heard is really important, but we talk about that like, does everybody have the opportunity to say what they feel? And there's a difference between somebody speaking and actually being heard. And so how do you define that piece there of being heard, as opposed to just being able to give feedback?
Yeah, I think that there's two elements at play here. I think it's making sure that leadership model effective conversation, and, like you say, effective discourse, effective exchange. And that's one, making sure that you are actively listening to that person, that you're, this comes back to kind of coaching training, very much so, of, clarifying what you've heard, making sure that what you've heard is what the person means, and having those conversations. But also the side effect of those conversations, of really decent conversations where people feel heard, is that that's modeled to them, so that when they're coming back to leadership, or they're speaking to other members within their team, they're doing the same thing. And so, when you're ensuring that there are opportunities for people to be heard, it's not just the impact that it has in that moment, in that conversation between those two people, it's the ripple effect of, that we're modeling really good, strong, meaningful conversations that then get replicated on and on and on. at the moment, the way that looks like in school for the particular present time is we've done several different things. We've set up a mailbox so that staff can, literally COVID concerns, that staff send any of their queries to, any worries, and that can be the smallest thing in the world. And some of the conversations that we're having as a result of those are really, we're implementing change as a result constantly. As I say, we're making tweaks and modifications to the rules that we're putting in place every day as a result of that. We're also, the senior leadership team are really strong in the fact that we meet every single day at the end of school. So it's almost a debrief. And that's as a result of, we're incredibly visible as a leadership team as well. So we take the lion's share of duties. We are out, we are visible, we are having conversations, we are making ourselves readily available and not sat in ivory towers, waiting for people to come to us with their queries. We're on the ground, so we're able to have those conversations. And the most powerful conversations you have with people are those in passing conversations. Those, I probably wouldn't have come to bother you because I would worry about bothering you and worry about you not being approachable, not being busy and being behind a door. But actually, you're available and you're out in the corridor, so I can talk to you for 2 minutes. And that's so much more powerful, I think.
Yeah, I have a really good example of that happening. I have, as a principal, I set up my day so that I could be out in the classrooms in the morning. And in the district where I was new, the idea was that you emailed the principal and then you'd be able to get things taken care of through email. And so I didn't like that idea because I don't like email all that much. It's necessary. We use it, but I don't love it. And so I checked my email just once a day in the afternoon. And what I found is exactly what you're talking about, that as I was out in the school talking and walking around, people would bring their concerns to me and say, oh, hey, I don't want to bug you, but did you get my email? I said, oh, I don't check my email till the afternoon. So what is it that you emailed me about? And they said, well, it was this, and you can just respond to the email. I was like, well, we can probably just solve that right this minute. So let's hash that out, take care of it. And sure enough, that's what we did. And what I found by doing that was that people recognized that I wasn't going to respond to their email right away. And so they were going to have to wait. And they knew I was going to be in the classrooms in the morning. And so they would just grab me then. And so many more productive things happened during that time rather than later. I love that answer to how we make sure that people are heard is by being out there talking to them and making sure that happens.
It's not just that resolution of the problem as well. What you're doing there, you're building fantastic relationships. It says so much about trust as well. In the book I wrote last year, I wrote a whole chapter about email because I detest email. It is not, I'm sure, in the corporate world, it has a place. And if you're working kind of in different locations, it definitely has a place. In a school and build to relationships in school, I don't think email is a productive way to go about it. It's those, like you say, it's those, you solve a problem in a 2-minute conversation that could take 18 emails and actually not reach the same resolution, the better resolution, I think, with email.
Yeah, I could definitely get behind you on that as a much stronger approach than what I take, where I think email is beneficial, and we don't have to make this all about email, but things that we want to make sure that people know that are written down, that we want to make sure everybody's on the same page. What I hate are those meetings where everybody goes and it's all just information that would have been better in an email, because then I could take my time to digest it. And so that I think contributes to what you're saying, that when you're with people, you should be building relationships, supporting, listening, talking, like having that whole conversation, not just a one way, here I'm saying everything and you have to listen to me, right? And so I think we can definitely agree on that.
No problems ever got solved via email.
Right. And more often than not, they get started more than others. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is this idea of taking care of ourselves you mentioned it before, as an individual responsibility to ourselves to do that. And I want to dig into that a little bit more, because a lot of times we hear, the people out there on the speaking circuit saying, you can't fill others' cups if yours is empty, so you need to fill your cup first. And I really hate that idea of you have to take care of yourself so you can take care of others. I really think that we should take care of ourselves because we're human beings and we need to take care of ourselves. How do you approach that idea of giving so much as an educator and not leaving anything for yourself? Let's talk about that a little bit.
I think that's the double-edged sword of our profession. I think that you're in a position of service, aren't you, as a teacher? And so you give and give. You think about the kind of, it's the give-take ratio, and you give and you give and you give. And so taking or being selfish, that idea of, and I say being selfish because I think sometimes self-care, or whatever you want to, self-preservation feels selfish to people because we're used to giving a great deal without necessarily instant reward. The reward from teaching comes sporadically, and it also comes at a much later point. Sometimes you have to wait 5 years to work that relationship with a child and reap the rewards from it and feel like you've done a good job. And so it feels, I think, quite unnatural to us to look after ourselves. It was a really interesting report that our regulator, Ofsted in the UK, did on Wellbeing report. And it actually talks about wellbeing as the outcome rather than the process. So instead of all of our, go to yoga class and let's get people involved in a reading club and other things that people feel like they don't actually have time to do, it's reframed as, wellbeing. You can't tell people what's going to make them feel better. So give them the time and the space and the autonomy over what they're doing in the day-to-day and the processes that support them to do that, so that they can choose what they want to do with their spare time rather than having it enforced upon them. So I think when we talk about this, this idea of kind of, filling up our own cup, I think that sometimes the way that has been executed in schools is, let's put on a timetable, let's put on a schedule of things that's going to make people feel better, when actually, the reality is nobody's at your yoga class because there's a marking policy that's so monumental that they can't see past their marking pile to get to the yoga class, or nobody likes yoga. And so I think it's rethinking, how do we improve our processes in school so that people can fill their cup in whatever way they choose, in whatever makes them feel better. That's so bespoke to you as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. How do we as school leaders then support people to fill their cup in their own way, even if we want to do, fun things as a staff and have a yoga class or a Zumba class or whatever? John Cat Educational supports high-quality teaching and learning by providing publications that are research-based, practical, and focused on the key topics proven essential in today's and tomorrow's schools. The latest John Cat publications include a book whose bold, transformative ideas amaze and infuriate people around the world, according to one reviewer, a title from global leaders in curriculum planning, practice, and retrieval, one book that says stop talking and start doing with regard to teacher well-being, and much more. These books, used by educators of all roles across North America and worldwide, amplify fresh, engaging voices with practical strategies to create transformative change. Learn more in our show notes at jethrojones.com/podcast. During COVID, every teacher is a new teacher. That's why innovative school leaders are turning to TeachFX, whose professional learning platform doubles student engagement online or in person. To learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer, visit teachfx.com/transformative principal. How do we support people in doing their own thing and taking care of themselves?
I think there's a few things at play. There was a really interesting piece of research by Jack Worth in the UK, it's a research institution called the NFER, about teacher autonomy. And that's so important. Our sense of purpose, why we come into work every day, what we feel fired up about, is really, really important. He talks a great deal about what teachers want autonomy over and what they don't want autonomy over. So teachers don't want to create their own behaviour policy in the classroom, because the behaviour policy whole school doesn't really support them. And so they're spending all of their time emailing parents, getting parents on side, getting students on side, having, bespoke punishments that they're having to decide. That's not what teachers came in to teach for. Teachers didn't come in to teach to send out 30 emails a day, that's not going to make them feel really good about being in the classroom. I think what we can do as school leaders is give them autonomy over things that are important, because they're the experts. So things like curriculum design, we should be involving teachers as much as we can to think about teaching, talk about teaching with their other subject experts, or teach. And that's what we're in, that's what teachers are employed in the building for. If you use them for anything else, and I'm not saying that we won't use them for anything else ever, that would be the Elysian dream, wouldn't it? But if we can make sure that the majority of their working week is spent talking about teaching, thinking about teaching or teaching, that's a really effective way of not just looking after your staff and making sure that your staff feel good about coming into work every day, but it's also a massive investment, because otherwise you're just using them as a really expensive admin tool. If they're firing out, if they're spending an hour a day on email, that's not the most effective way to spend my money as a school leader, in what is a graduate profession and a graduate salary. I have people in my office staff who can do that for me. So I think the way that school leaders can best support teachers is have a look at their systems, have a look at their processes, speak to people on the ground, speak to teachers, and work out how their time is being spent. And that can even be in the formal way of a cost sheet, but how is your time being spent? Have we got opportunities to talk about teaching with your other subject experts? Have you got opportunities to really think about your practice and have a look at how it looks in other people's classrooms? And have you got time to actually think about your curriculum and how you're teaching it for your students? If we can give them the opportunity to do that and remove all the other stuff as much as we possibly can, or give it out to other people who are specialists in admin or behaviour policy or whatever else, then that's probably the single best thing we can do for staff in schools, I believe.
Yeah, I really like that approach. And the way that I've termed that here on the podcast and in other things that I've done is by finding out what people's strengths are and then putting them in positions to use those as much as possible. And so for most teachers, you can pretty confidently say their skill and their strength is in talking about teaching, thinking about teaching, planning teaching, and doing the teaching. And so giving them as much time as possible to do that is really powerful. What I have really seen so powerfully with that is that there are some people who are good at teaching and enjoy it, but they don't realize that that's not actually what they love about school. And what they love about school, so the behavior issue, for example, I had an amazing teacher who was a 6th grade teacher, and she was great as a teacher. But then we created a behavior coach position for her and basically said, behavior is all yours in the school. And so that is going to be your whole focus. And once we did that, she blossomed more than we could have ever imagined. And she realized that was what her real passion was dealing with kids who were in difficult situations and helping them make good choices. And it was this huge boon to her career that eventually caused her to go into get a master's of social work and move into different positions within the district. But it was so amazing to see that happen. And I've seen that with other people, but that's just the one example that I want to talk about. When you can find that out, if there's something else that somebody's good at, then it really opens the door for them to really blossom into to do the kinds of things that they just love doing. And that's a real thing. So I really appreciate that approach. And starting with just giving teachers more time to think about and talk about teaching is a really great place to go. I do want to talk just a little bit in addition about the idea of guilt. And in your book, Stop Talking About Wellbeing, you say this sentence: if we continue to run our schools on guilt and interpret the fact that there are not enough hours to complete our roles as a failure on our part, we are sorely mistaken. And can you talk a little bit about that idea of the guilt that we put on teachers and that teachers put on themselves? Because that's another topic that I've talked a lot about.
Yeah, I think this is prevalent in many professions. I think it's more at the spearhead within teaching because we're dealing with children. And I have worked with and have many colleagues that have worked with this. We have this strap line of, but it's for the kids. and that's used to kind of hold over people sometimes in putting work on them without actually thinking about it. It's a time cost exercise. Every single person has a finite amount of hours within their working week, and so if we're asking them to, for example, if we're asking a teacher to mark books every week using a particular policy, it takes them 2.5 hours to mark those books, and they've got 4 classes, that's 10 hours marking a week. Where is that time coming from? And actually sitting down and thinking, okay, well, what am I asking from my teachers? Have they got the time in there to do that? And that's a really nice, easy, straightforward way of removing that guilt, because I think we need to work with the school leaders the assumption that everybody comes to work to do a good job. No one comes in to be mediocre. I really do strongly believe that. And so what we have to do is start reframing the conversations that we're having, maybe with that assumption, to go, okay, how can I help you? Because you clearly want to do a good job. That guilt comes from people taking on things because someone has sometimes communicated it in such a way that it is non-negotiable. And I think teachers, we are our own worst enemy on that front, that we will say yes and yes and yes and keep going because because we know that what we do impacts upon children's lives and children's outcomes, and so that's a heavy burden to bear. And so as school leaders, we have a moral duty to alleviate that guilt wherever we can, really, by making it really explicit to people that they can only do so much within a working week. They need to have a life as well. That's really important.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. The things that I've seen with that teacher guilt is that you feel that you have to do things a certain way, or many educators are rule followers and they want to do the right thing and they want to please the people in positions of authority over them. And, especially right now with all this coronavirus stuff, I mean, for example, teaching a class live to the kids in your classroom and to kids who are at home is really not a good idea. And I believe that it is possible to do that. I do not believe that most teachers are equipped to do that, and yet many are doing that because that's what their district has decided. And I really think that is an unfortunate situation, that nobody should be forced into that position. However, if you have that ability and you can do that, then by all means go for it. But I really think that that's one of those, a very specific example of how we put unrealistic expectations on our teachers and ask them to do things that we really can't expect them,
and that they'll say yes to, and that they'll say yes to, and if you know that, and your staff are going to say yes to something that's unreasonable, then you have to question, is it okay for you? Is it acceptable to be asking the question in the first place? And I do agree. I think remote working and there was lots of media coverage about, how we can start rethinking flexible working now that we've worked from home. And I'm like, this isn't, flexible working. My 2-year-old and my 3-year-old are scavenging around on the floor while I work. That's not what working from home looks like.
Right. Yeah. There's so much more that we could go into about that, but I really appreciate how you said that we really need to focus on things that actually do work and are manageable, that we can handle, and then being able to say, I'm not going to do this when it's not a good idea. So what's your advice for principals to get those reactions from their teachers? Because the reality is teachers will go along with so much without saying how they really feel. How do you help principals know how to get their teachers to tell them what's not working?
Yeah, I love those people. To be honest, because the vast majority of people will tell you what you want to hear. And I think the more senior you become within school, the less you hear the truth, because again, people want to do a good job, and so you get told the things that they think you want to hear. What I would suggest is that you're speaking. We have kind of a level within the UK. I don't know how similar it is over there with you guys, but so our middle leaders, we have honest conversations with those, and it's creating those layers so that you have an insight. So it might not necessarily be that you're having the conversation as a senior leader with somebody else, but it's again that ripple effect. So my middle leaders and their kind of what we call TLR holders within. So we have kind of sub leaders within departments are having, again, those micro conversations, those in-passing conversations, and that filters back to you. So it is really about making sure that people are readily available, making sure that people have the opportunity. So, for example, at the moment, we've stripped out all of our meeting time, all of our open evenings with parents, because that's not an option, things like that. All of our meeting time is stripped out other than our subject level faculty time, because that's really important at the moment, that our subjects are working really closely together and, more importantly, looking after each other. So things like live lessons and remote learning and things like that we can bring those subjects together. For example, all of the English department come together and discuss about how that can look, how they can put together work and work in cluster groups to put together work for students should they be off, should they have to go into self-isolation for a 10-day period and things like that, so that we're not all sitting isolated in our classrooms doing the same thing without, unknowingly the person in the next room is doing exactly the same work as you. It's making sure that people have opportunities to speak to each other, I think, is really important, because you have to find outlets where you will fail to find out the truth. People won't be honest with you, sadly, because they want to do a good job. It's with the very best of intentions.
Well, and that's something that I've certainly seen. And one of my greatest failures as a principal was in a school. We were doing a lot of innovative, great things, and people didn't like it, but nobody ever told me that they didn't like it. And even though I felt like I was providing opportunity and space for us to have those conversations, and I was actively asking things like, what's wrong with this plan? What's not going to work? People were still just telling me what I wanted to hear. And that's not a good position for anyone to be in, because, when things hit the fan and something didn't work, then everybody was like, see, I always thought that didn't work, but nobody ever told me that, and that's probably because I wasn't, open or didn't appear open or whatever that may be, even though in my heart, I really wanted to hear where things were going to fail. So anyway, that's something that I've struggled with a lot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that, so we're in a very similar position at the moment. So I've just brought in, rewritten our performance management policy to work in line with coaching. So rather than, your line manager sit you down for the year, tell you what you're good at and what you're bad at, what you need to improve on, and these are your targets, go away and do them, and that's you for the year. Teachers are being encouraged to set their own goals. So it's far more autonomy, it's far more kind of pedagogical and subject driven, but more importantly, created by the people who know their strengths and areas of development, the teacher. And so part of that was carrying out coaching training with all of our staff. And I had several people over the last couple of weeks go, do you know what, it's too much. I've got so many things to think about at the moment. We're going back to school. We're trying to get our heads around remote working. I don't know when I'm going to find time for this. I've got a deadline the same week for this remote working plan to be in for. And so many things were hitting the same pressure point. And so, I think sometimes, and I am incredibly devoted and in love with the concept of coaching. I'm really excited to share that with my team. And so, part of you could just turn around and go, no, we're ploughing on regardless. But it was about listening to those staff, and actually we moved some deadlines around, and we extended deadlines from other areas, of the senior leadership team in order to make it work, so that people felt that they had the space and the time to think about their own development. And actually we gave priority to that as a result of listening to people. And I'm really grateful to those staff who are saying, everyone else is thinking it, but no one wants to say anything. I want to talk to you about this and have this honest conversation. Without those people, you can't operate with that kind of that really established sense of trust, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And as I've helped people focus more on a coaching perspective to teacher evaluation, that's an area where it is more difficult, because it's a lot easier to just say, what are the expectations, and let me just do those. But that doesn't provide real growth. That just provides checking off a box, filling in a paper, and that's it. And, so a couple of years ago, I got an evaluation from my supervisor, and she marked me as distinguished in every single column. And I don't say that to brag, but I say that to say that evaluation meant absolutely nothing to me. And she said in our meeting, this is the best principal evaluation that I've written as an assistant superintendent. And while, I felt great about that part, like, yeah, I'm the best, it wasn't helping me grow at all. And so, I glanced at it, but I didn't pay any attention to the things that she wrote. However, when she was more critical the following year and addressed some of my weaknesses that were coming out, I was very curious about that, because I wanted to see where she saw that I was weak. And when I was able to get that feedback, I worked harder to improve my weaknesses than when she just said that I was amazing all around. Because saying that I was amazing all around, it didn't really help me in any regard. It just reinforced my own confidence in myself, which isn't always healthy, right? And so sometimes we think we're a lot better than we are. So anyway, that idea of coaching people, I think, is super powerful. The final question I'd like to ask you is, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative principal like you, Kat?
Listen, you need to put yourself in a position, particularly at the moment, to be able to listen to as many people as possible. And that's all the small conversations. I'm just thinking about my conversations today, from somebody who went out and bought a new sofa at the weekend, to somebody else's kid who took a first couple of steps, to more formal logistical ideas about how we're going to get kids down to sport and back up again when we're working in bubbles. All of those different conversations, make yourself available for them, because they are building really strong, established relationships long term.
Yes, very good. And I want to remind everybody that Kat is the author of the book Stop Talking About Wellbeing, which we touched on a few parts from that book, but there's so much more that we didn't get to. So make sure you check that out. You can get show notes, including a link to her work at jethrojones.com/podcast/episode 362. And Kat, once again, thank you so much for being part of Transformative Principal.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you to our valued partner, John Catt Educational. If you are a leader looking to make transformative change by providing yourself and your leaders and teachers with professional development that is research-based and rigorous, yet easy to digest and full of practical strategies, check out the latest publications from John Catt. Visit us.johncattbookshop.com to find information on bulk orders or learn much more in our show notes. You can also use the code TRANSFORMATIVE to save a bundle at us.johncattbookshop.com. School principals across the country are using TeachFX's virtual PD and job-embedded feedback to boost student engagement during COVID. With TeachFX, teachers get 8 times more feedback and generate 144% more student engagement on average in a school year with no additional work for school leaders or teachers. To learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer, visit teachfx.com/transformativeprincipal.